Do you
British
know who
government.
else? Do you know who else gets U.S. aid funding?
Yes.
The journalist that was just murdered in Gaza. Does that mean that he's fake?
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. The Struggle is on over 30 cable stations from Maine to New York City. We start with some good news. The release of Palestinian heroes Ahed Tamimi and her mother Nariman from an Israeli prison. You recall Ahed was imprisoned without bail for slapping and kicking a heavily armed Israeli soldier on the day that Israeli soldiers shot one of her cousins in the head. There was an international outcry, yet the Israeli judge gave her 8 months in prison. She was released a week or so early. Her mother's crime? Filming Ahed and putting it on the internet. Great to see them released. Days before the Tamimis were released, 2 Italian artists painted a picture of Ahed on the apartheid wall. This is what happened to the artists. Vandalism, as if the wall were a national treasure instead of being a giant act of vandalism itself. It's reported that a Syrian regime radio station got a hold of Ahed Tamimi for an interview and kept trying to get her to praise Assad, but she wouldn't. Every time they asked her about Assad, the army, or the war, she would just say, "God protect the Syrian people." Good for her. At the weekly vigil opposite the Yale bookstore, a banner about Ahed and her freedom, and another about the Freedom Flotilla to Gaza. The Al-Auda, as you know, was captured by Israeli pirates on the high seas, An Israeli spokesman said the capture was just routine. Actually, the Israeli Navy was quite brutal. This is from former IDF soldier Yonatan Shapira, who was on board the boat and who described raiders' treatment of those on board. They slammed Herman, the captain, against the wall again and again, while threatening to take him to the ship's belly and finish him off when no one is watching. A fist in the face of Arnie Birge, the old mechanic. And the finest tradition, electric shocks. This time we wore life vests of the type that covers the chest well. But don't worry, the brave naval commando combatants just electrocuted, tasered, Charlie, the first officer, in his head. And more electric shocks to Eugen, the cook, and to 60-year-old Mike, a chair of a trade union and human rights activist from New Zealand. Be sure to listen to an interview I did with Mazen Kumsia, who was aboard the Alauda on the Naples to Palermo section of the journey. It's on our website, thestruggle.org. As we record, a second boat, a Swedish ship, is nearing Gaza, attempting to breach the evil Israeli-U.S. blockade. Now, about a big award ceremony coming to New Haven in September, the Gandhi Peace Award. Full disclosure, I work for the group that gives it, Promoting Enduring Peace. Here's a bit of the history of the award. The Gandhi Peace Award was the creation of Jerome Davis, the founder of Promoting Enduring Peace, a former Yale professor and former president of the American Federation of Teachers. It was named after the great Indian pacifist and independence leader and champion of nonviolent activism, Mohandas Gandhi. It was first awarded in 1960 to Eleanor Roosevelt for her work in promoting the United Nations as a force for world peace. Over 50 people have accepted the award. We'll mention a few of them. One is medical Dr. Helen Caldicott for her anti-nuclear work. Groups she helped create went on to win 2 Nobel Peace Prizes. Martin Luther King Jr. accepted the award the year he won the Nobel Peace Prize. Dr. Benjamin Spock wrote best-selling baby care books, but he received the award because of his outspoken opposition and direct action against the war in Vietnam. Daniel Ellsberg is known for revealing the Pentagon Papers. Lucius Walker was commended for his years of work with Pastors for Peace and for defying U.S. sanctions on Cuba. Cesar Chavez for his decades of work using nonviolence to organize Latino and other farm workers. Rabbis Ehud Bandel and Arik Asherman, co-founders of the Israeli group Rabbis for Human Rights. Bill McKibben, America's foremost activist fighting fossil fuel-induced climate change, founder of 350. Tom Goldtooth for his environmental work and his founding of the Indigenous Environmental Network. Omar Barghouti for his leadership in the BDS movement, the measures of economic pressure being used to get Israel to honor Palestinian human rights. Ralph Nader for his activism in the consumer movement, his opposition to nuclear power, and his work for Middle East peace. The award comes with a substantial cash prize and a medallion made out of an interesting material, peace bronze. It's actually copper, made from recycled parts of abandoned nuclear weapons systems. Now that I've piqued your interest, the winner of the 2018 Gandhi Peace Award is singer-songwriter Jackson Browne. longtime PEP officer James Van Pelt spoke about Brown at the news conference.
He came to attention with his very first song when he was a young guy at 28 or something. And he sang about his eyes. Doctor, my eyes have seen the tears and the slow parade of fears. Without crying, you must help me if you can. And the idea was that the singer had trained himself to stop crying over the world's ills, and as a result had lost the ability to see the sky. Now that's a very profound statement to make in a top 10 pop song, but that was the first of many, and those songs have embraced all kinds of human rights issues and the Central America conflict, lives in the balance, and most recently the environment. He started the organization called Muse, Musicians for Safe Energy. He has been a major activist from the pop music community on environmental causes in general. He's now very concerned about the amounts of plastics going into the environment, which is a very current concern that people have. And he's known for never turning down an offer or a request to appear in a benefit concert. But he will be speaking what we call a message of hope and inspiration to the people who come to that event.
Now, the last section of the Molly Crabapple talk at the Brooklyn Library in May about Brothers of the Gun, a book she co-authored and illustrated with Marwan Hisham.
I think it's always a combination. I think the reason I've done so much work on Syria was I started covering it in 2013 because all of the smartest people I knew were they were debating what was going on, and so I went to Lebanon and I interviewed people in the Bekaa Valley in Tripoli, like recent refugees. And there was this woman who was from Bab Amr, which is a suburb of Homs, that saw some of the most brutal crimes by the regime, including tons and tons of bombardment that killed two very well-known Western journalists and countless Syrians. And this woman, she was like just this like tough working class woman, like, you know, just like tough and cool. Like, you know, she was like smiling, giving me tea. We were hanging in this abandoned building where she lived. Her husband was there, and she had left off being a field nurse because her husband had lost his legs to diabetes that wasn't treated, and she needed to take care of him. And I remember she was sort of saying, like, why isn't America intervening? It was right after the Obama Red Line thing. And I'm anti-intervention, and I don't particularly think America has any capacity to do anything good in the Middle East. But also, that was a question she had the right to ask, right? That she's asking, really, it's not even about America. She's asking, why is the world allowing us to get slaughtered every day, and why doesn't anyone give a damn that we're getting slaughtered? And that was, and shouldn't the world do something about it? And that was a question that I don't have any answers to her, and any good answers, and it's certainly not, you know, an easy one. Anything easy. I told her, like, look what America did with Iraq. Like, you know, you shouldn't want them to be involved in your country, but that I don't think satisfied her much. So I kept covering Syria because I wanted to know some answers, and because I was also so humbled by the bravery of that woman who had given so much and to a revolution that she did believe in, and who was still there with her back straight, you know, serving tea in an abandoned building that she tried to make nice, and still defiantly telling, you know, her story of what she believed in.
TSVN didn't do the recording. For some reason, the excellent videographer didn't include the exuberant applause at the end of Crabapple's talk. Well, then came the Q&A. In the first one, Crabapple eviscerated one of those anti-imperialists the type who doubts what Syrians say and believes everything that Assad or Putin says.
You said something interesting about not being sure of the truth, and that the statement that in war the first casualty is truth, and that in a situation like Syria you have to question yourself many times about what you think is true. And you also said, you referred obliquely to these chemical weapons attacks that are blamed on the Assad regime. Now, giving no undue respect to the Assad regime, it is true that the United States has been trying to effect regime change in Syria for a long time.
Not very effectively, certainly.
Well, they've done a good job in wrecking the country and carving it up. So the question is, what would convince you that some of these events are not what they seem? I mean, you have this Netflix documentary about the White Helmets, and people should just wait a minute. One last point. People should realize that the White Helmets have been funded to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars from the U.S. and British governments.
Do you know who else gets U.S. aid funding?
Yes.
The journalist that was just murdered in Gaza. Does that mean that he's fake?
No,
not
at
of things,
all.
Lots of
Not
things
at
get
all.
U.S. aid
Not at
funding.
all.
The chemical weapons attacks have been proven over and over and over and over again. They have been done multiple times by the regime, not just with sarin, but with chlorine gas attacks. Some of them have been verified by Western journalists, like Karim Shaheen in 2000, I believe it was the 2016 attack. And I mean, this is just to deny that the chemical weapons attacks happen. It's just atrocity denial for its own sake. I mean, you can. Robert Fisk cannot even translate the slogan of the Ba'athist Party. He thinks it is like Mother of the Arab Nations because he doesn't know Arabic, even though he lived in Lebanon for years. I mean, I don't know what to tell you. You know, whatever you think about how the war should go, whatever you think about Assad staying or going, those are your own decisions. But denying chemical weapons attacks against children because you don't want to have to deal with moral complexity or angst is disgusting. I'm sorry.
So I have two questions for you. One is, do you or Marwan have any ideas on how the issues in Syria could get resolved? And the second one is, what are you working on now?
Those are wonderful. So I try not to propose solutions for Syria because I'm not Syrian, and ultimately, like, I don't have to suffer with whatever happens to the country. And also, I suppose I don't feel qualified to in many ways. I know that what Marwan would like is, and what he's often said, is that he would like a country that had autonomous regions, sort of like the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq. Because the problem with Syria is that there are 1.5 million people on the government wanted list right now. These are people who can't return to government areas, or they'll be tortured and perhaps killed, right? And so the government, I'm quite sure that at this point, Assad will take over the country, possibly with Turkey annexing, big parts of the north. Anything like that is not going to allow refugees to return. It's not going to allow people who are living in camps in Jordan to return to their homes because they might be tortured to death if they do. So I think that the hope of having some sort of autonomy, and again, this is not my own opinion, because I shouldn't be speaking out of turn in that way, but the hope of having some sort of autonomy would be that you would have places that people could live in the country where, even if they fundamentally disagreed with, the central government, or if they disagreed with, the Kurdish-led American-backed forces that now run the east of the Euphrates area, or if they disagreed with the Turkish occupation, they'd at least have somewhere in the country that they could live without being afraid of getting arrested and tortured to death, and where at least they could try to build a life. I think that everyone would like there to be a democratic, unified Syria based on, secular principles and respect for human rights. But I know that Marwan has a lot of cynicism about that actually happening. What am I working on now? I don't know, man. This killed me. Like, this book killed me. This is the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. It's probably like my most precious project I've ever done, but it was impossibly hard, and I don't know what I'm doing next. I rather want to take a break or something, I don't know. But I have to, next I think is I'm going on tour. That's what I'm doing next.
Hi, Molly. Oh, sorry. Hi, Molly.
Hey, Pat.
How's it going? So I just wanted to clarify something really quickly about the White Helmets before I ask my question. I embedded with the White Helmets in both Azaz and Aleppo, and I'm alive. So any conspiracy theories you can address to me later. But the second question I had was, I'd like you to describe the airstrike we saw in 2014.
So me and Patrick went together into Syria in 2014, and also I just want to say that people who smear rescue workers are the scum of the earth. I'm just going to say that hospitals and rescue workers are not targets, no matter what you think of the ideology of the group ruling their area, and it revolts me that people are smearing the White Helmets or are smearing hospitals. But furthermore, me and Pat went into Bab al-Salam IDP camp and Azaz in 2014, and we went to the site of an airstrike that was very recent, and the whole block had been leveled. It was gone, and in that leveled rubble, there was a guy that was digging. And Pat wanted to take photos because he was, we were working, right? And this guy got so furious at us. And he said, my family they're the first people in the revolution. My son's in the revolution. And now he's dead. And you want to make some money off of his blood? Is that what you want to do? Did you come to my country to make money off of our blood? And, we were like, no, sorry, like, respect. And so when people say that these airstrikes are some sort of propaganda by that the people in rebel areas are just like blowing themselves and their kids up to make the government look bad, so America will intervene, which it hasn't done in 7 years, against the government, but, keep on trying. I mean, when people say that, that is so inane. And I just remember that man who was so furious at us because we wanted to take pictures of the aftermath of an airstrike because his son was buried under the rubble and he didn't want us making money off of his blood. And that man supported the revolution. So, yeah, I don't know what to say to you. If I have a lot of patience for people who have different views on, what should happen in Syria or about intervention or any manner of policy, but I have zero patience with war crimes deniers.
Hello. Is Marwan watching the live stream?
I think so, probably.
Marwan, you wrote a really amazing book. Molly, too. I just wanted to say that we see you both, and thank you for letting us see the Syria that you experienced. And my actual question is, how often were you worried about Marwan?
I mean, when he was in Syria, every hour. Every hour, yeah, of course.
I got in the last question. When Raqqa was, when ISIS was driven out of Raqqa, driven out or entombed, it was done by the U.S. just blowing everything up. So the first question is, what did Marwan think of that? Did he think there was some other way of driving ISIS out?
So the U.S. destroyed 90% of Raqqa. The U.S. also destroyed huge swaths of Mosul. And killed perhaps tens of thousands of civilians in their war against ISIS. Marwan was actually the person who broke the news of the U.S. airstrikes. He was at his cafe, and he was so intimately attuned with the sound of the regime bombing his city that he immediately noticed when there was a nicer plane doing it. And he broke the news 20 minutes before the Pentagon did. And at first, according to Marwan, the U.S. strikes were welcomed by some people in Raqqa because they thought that it would get rid of the ISIS occupation. But he was very skeptical of them because he had basically seen a lot of Al Jazeera about all of the civilians that were killed, especially in U.S. drone strikes. And he was like, I mean, this has equal chance of killing us all. And at first, the U.S. Strikes in Raqqa started out relatively precision, but by the final month of final months of those campaigns, it became a massacre. And the U.S. is, by the way, not doing anything to rebuild this. There are 6,000 reports of people still entombed and rotting in their homes that the U.S. bombed. The entire city is riddled with landmines that Trump is not giving any sort of budget to clear. I'm not a military strategist, and so, but I do know that at various times there have been deals made that allow militants to withdraw from cities, and then, you know, basically they kill the militants outside of the cities. I don't know if that would have worked with ISIS or not. I think ISIS's strategy of like welding people basically into their homes and using them as human shields was a particularly vicious one. However, the truth is that America also did destroy Raqqa.
For those who missed our program from 2 weeks ago, some wonderful drawings by Crabtree from the book that were on exhibit in the library. Here the drawing used for the cover, a man playing a gun as if it was a violin. This is not Raqqa, but Aleppo. Marwan Hisham attended the University of Aleppo, where protests like the one shown here took place before rebel groups took over part of the city. The person on the bottom has markings on his face that read, Revolution University. Note the attempt at solidarity. An unveiled woman holding a Quran, another holding a cross. A scene of protest. Assad's forces flung against the people. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.